evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. And I'm your host, George Binns. And we're having with us this evening our state representative for Essex 6. And John, if you put up the picture of Essex 6, would appreciate it. So that's what it looks like. And you'll notice there's a little piece of Wenham stuck on the corner, first precinct of Wenham. So I guess one of the questions is, since you're representing both Beverly and a piece of Wenham, how much difference is there between what kind of services Beverly needs or expects and Wenham does?
Yeah, there are a bunch of differences and lots of things we have in common. So I think, we all know that across the whole North Shore, there's a lot of, we live in one community, work in another, go out to eat in another. Like it's all kind of one big area that functions as a region. So a lot of the issues are similar that people are thinking about. But there are some key differences. So Beverly has a city form of government, whereas Wenham has a town form of government.
Yeah.
So last week I was at the annual Wenham town meeting, which looks a little different than a city council meeting. You have 300-400 people. Everyone has the opportunity to speak on an issue, to propose amendments to the issues that are going to be voted on. They work through the town budget in that public forum. So you have the select board and the finance committee and the town manager all sort of doing the day-to-day behind the scenes prep, but it comes to the legislative body of the whole town. So that's exciting and a big difference in just process, the timing of when things can happen and how the process goes. And the other big difference kind of structurally is that Wenham is part of the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District. So when we talk about education funding, a lot of the same challenges are in place in terms of how municipalities, cities, or towns are trying to keep pace with the cost of education. So we've talked a lot about that in the past, and it just plays out a little bit differently for a regional school district versus a school district that is a single municipality. So we've been working on things like regional school transportation is its own funding line in the state budget. The contribution of the state to regional school transportation looks different than it does for a municipality that's a single school district. So, in both Wenham and Hamilton over the past week, they had town meetings where an override was proposed in both communities to tax above the Prop 2.5 limit in order to fully fund the regional school district. So both towns had to pass that as a provision at town meeting and on a ballot. So yesterday was election day in both communities to elect local officials, select board, school committee members, things like that. And they had ballot questions for Proposition 2.5 override to fund school operations and a debt exclusion to fund a new roof for the high school that will be matched with state funding. So the Mass School Building Administration is matching that project. But in order to get that match, both communities had to pass that appropriation and the debt exclusion. So it has passed. That's moving. Both are moving forward. But that's a big difference between how the communities operate and therefore how they interact with state funding. What we need to advocate for, and it's interesting. So something like the Chapter 70 education funding formula that we've been having a lot of conversations about at the state level and talking a lot about in both communities, it works a little differently for the two communities, and the types of funding outside of that can be accessed are a little different. So for me, it's just a great example of why the legislature sometimes moves slowly on things and needs to hear from reps from across the state who have communities that need different things. And so even though we're all one region and, you don't even notice sometimes when you're crossing the line between Beverly and Wenham, the nature of town and city governments being a little different and the needs of both communities being a little different mean that I have to factor in both those things.
So they passed the override both of them.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting because
Yeah.
Beverly's going to have to challenge itself
Yeah.
with how do we fund the system,
Yeah.
and that's another discussion. But anyway,
Yeah. And I am hopeful. So this week, the House Ways and Means Committee released their draft of the budget proposal, and we're taking it up. Amendments are due at 5 p.m. today, and then we're taking it up in a week and a half. And so far, the proposal increases the Chapter 70 apportionment and increases the minimum aid level or minimum aid increase, which both Beverly and Wenham are minimum aid increase communities. So that's a step in the right direction. The budget process has many more steps to go, but we've all been trying to find a way to do that. So I'm pleased that the next step is in the right direction, at least.
so I'm a little confused. What is this minimum aids?
Yeah, so it's sort of a complexity of the Chapter 70 funding formula. So Chapter 70 is the part of state law that determines how state funds contribute back to education statewide through municipalities. And essentially, the formula looks at each community's capacity to pay and the cost of providing the same quality of education statewide. So in an area where the cost of living is lower and teachers don't need to make as much to live in the community, the cost of providing the same services may be lower than in downtown Boston. So it factors all those things in and then figures out essentially like what is the gap between what it costs to provide the kind of education we feel like everyone in Massachusetts should get and how much of that the community itself can cover from property taxes. And sort of looks at how to fill that gap. And the state promises to fill that gap and not exceed, for the state contribution, like getting to that sort of standard that we set statewide. Now, a community can increase its contribution and go above that minimum, and most communities do. But now, a little over half of communities, it's I think probably getting closer to 2/3, of communities across the state can afford up to it's like 80 some odd % of that standard that we're trying to reach. So they get a minimum contribution from the state. And each year, the state, we have committed to increase the funding per pupil by a certain amount, even if the community can, on paper, afford to keep increasing as well. And so that's a set dollar amount per pupil. So then, you look at if enrollment is rising or lowering, your amount might go up by more or less. And in the governor's proposal, that was set at a $75 increase per student for this coming year over last year's funding level, regardless of changes in that ability to pay or the standard. And the House Ways and Means budget proposal puts it at 160. So that's a big jump in it.
The difference,
Yeah, and so the estimates of what that would mean for Beverly and Wenham just came out on Wednesday, and it adds a significant. I want to say it's like $300,000 more for Beverly than had been in the governor's proposal.
Yeah.
So again, it has multiple steps. The House hasn't passed our budget yet. That'll be in 2 weeks, and then the Senate will take it up. So that number will keep moving, but it moves in the right direction because it means more funding where we need it.
Well, when you start talking about the budget, like the cities, the state also has a requirement to balance the budget every year.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, Wednesday the 15th of all days, the tax day,
we all love tax day.
The Senate passed a bonding bill for $3.64 billion for environmental bonds, whatever that all means. And when you look into the details, Massachusetts is one of the highest bonded, highest debted states in the country. We're right behind New York and California, or maybe we're exceed, depending on whose books you look at, we may be even number 2. So we're in a situation where we're borrowing a lot of money and we owe a lot of money, and yet we're supposed to be balancing the budget, and you start to wonder, well, what are all these environmental things that are worth
Yep.
$3.64 billion?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's true. The bond bills authorize spending, borrowing to spend up to a certain amount. It doesn't necessarily translate directly into borrowing right away. It just authorizes these are programs and priorities that we as a legislature agree are worth the money in the long run. And so we use bonding to cover long-term purchases, just like you're trying to buy a house and agree to a 30-year mortgage because you're planning to live in the house for that long, or move and take your equity with you to be able to purchase the next home if you need to move. But you know that it's rather than just saving in order to make purchases, you're smoothing your spending over time by borrowing. So it's smart, it pays off, and it allows us to also make investments that benefit everyone, regardless of who are taxpayers right now versus 5 years from now versus 10 years from now. So we spread those things over time. So it's used for larger kinds of expenditures that have longer lifespans, so that when we're paying matches when we're benefiting from the investments. So this authorization that the Senate has just passed, it was based on a bill the governor filed with her priorities. The Senate has now adjusted, and then it'll come to the House.
The House will get it.
And
so what's in it?
It includes a lot of the kind of long-term resilience work that we need as a coastal community in Beverly. Major investments in things like our water resources, how we're managing the vulnerable coastline. It includes really a pretty wide range of things, including some policy issues. So I've started hearing from constituents who are happy about investments that this will authorize to help move us towards some more climate resilience and address some of our resource constraints. And I've heard from some constituents who are not happy about some of the proposed policy changes around waste reduction. So there are a couple of kind of hot button issues that came up when the Senate was debating around reducing single-use plastics. So I've heard from a lot of people on that. But it's a vehicle to do some of those bigger changes. So, when we think about how this area, how our districts in the North Shore could tap into that bond authorization in order to fund some big priorities, we've just been having conversations that I sort of joined midstream, but that have been going on for 5 or 6 years around the North Shore Water Resiliency Plan. So all the communities in the Ipswich River watershed, which includes the Beverly and Salem Water Supply Board and includes Wenham as a separate entity, all drawing from the same basic watershed. There are a lot of challenges in maintaining quantity and quality of drinking water and useful water.
We went through it a couple of years ago with cleaning up Wenham Lake.
Yep. Yeah, and now there are new federal regulations around PFAS, the sort of forever chemicals.
What again?
So PFAS. What? I'm not going to remember the exact chemical. It's perfluorocarbon something.
Oh, okay.
But it's essentially like a lot of hard to remove chemicals that are everywhere in everything, including our water.
Yeah.
And there is a set of regulations sort of phasing in now to reduce the levels in our drinking water. And that requires a whole set of treatment options that weren't needed before. And everyone has to invest in them. So there's things like that this may enable. There's other, a lot of the advocates around our district and statewide who are interested in preserving open space and recreation, interested in sort of how we're taking care of our open space statewide have got some priorities in there. There's, resilience to drought, coastal projects. So what we have at Lynch Park and at Aubert Park, where we've been mapping out ways to make those spaces more resilient to flooding events and keep their usability and prevent really costly damage. Projects like that are the sorts of things that might be enabled by that bond bill.
It gets to be an interesting conflict when you start talking about open spaces, because everywhere in the state there is a housing problem, and one of the only ways to solve it, well, there's two ways to solve it: either very tall buildings, which don't go over well in a town,
Not everywhere.
maybe in Boston, but not in very many other places. And at the same time, you have requirements like in Beverly, 10,000 square feet for a lot. And you don't get many houses built when you're talking 10,000 square feet and you start to restrict how much land is available for building. So I see this is a challenge coming on, and I'm not sure people are in the mode of, well, we need more housing. And I just mentioned earlier about the people who work in the city being able to live in the city. And that's been an ongoing problem for, I don't know, 30, 40 years.
Right,
And it ain't getting any better.
Well, I mean, we are doing a lot to dig out of that hole. So, there are a lot of new housing starts underway, not as many as we need. And, community by community, some are still really lagging, some are sort of going backwards or slowing down. But there is a lot happening. So I think where we need to keep at it and need to keep expanding the range of options, but everything from those larger projects to the small accessory dwelling unit projects to thinking about more like tiny homes and single to duplex or triple decker style, like increased density in infill areas, like everything on the table. And I think, the last several years, we've started to see, legislation was passed at the state level, and a lot of communities have now adopted changes to zoning on a bunch of different fronts. And a previous housing bond bill authorized borrowing and spending on a whole host of housing projects that take time to roll out. So the thing about a bond bill is that it provides that authorization from the legislature to the executive branch to execute along these priorities and borrow as needed up to that amount. But it doesn't guarantee that the projects happen. It just guarantees that the authorization is there to make them happen. But the administration still has to prioritize what's timely and to look sort of year by year. Usually they're multi-year authorizations, and look year by year at, are things changing in the state budget overall that, to your point about our level of indebtedness, we have to watch where our debt payment schedule is, just like the city has that table. The state does as well, and will only roll out that bonding and those projects to the extent that there is capacity to pay them down as planned and to execute the project. So, having state agency staff who can oversee programs, having partners who can implement programs, community is able to absorb grant funding. That's all, those things need to be kind of assessed year by year, sometimes month by month. So you can authorize a big set of programs, but then the implementation is really a lot more nuanced and can be a lot more responsive to how things are changing.
Well, you get into one of the issues that the state has approved of statewide ADUs, auxiliary dwelling units. And does this, for instance, does this bond floating that you're planning. Does it somehow or other augment or do something to make ADUs a little more affordable? And
So I think there was some authorization in the housing bond bill that contained the policy language authorizing ADUs
Yeah.
statewide to create the kinds of grant programs that municipalities could use to
yeah, that's the
fund
question
them.
that comes down to.
Yeah.
When you get down to the point of, I want to put an ADU in my backyard.
Yeah,
Can I get some support from the state
yeah,
to build this thing
Yeah.
or modify the garage or whatever you have to do to make
Yeah.
it? And do I get a break on interest rates or something like that?
right.
So, I mean,
Yeah, and
These-
communities are experimenting with different, affordable housing trusts are considering putting money towards a pool where a homeowner could apply for a grant.
yeah,
Some have experimented with whether they can create tax incentives on the property taxes. There's a lot of continuing to kind of experiment with
Yeah.
what will make it doable.
well, you mentioned earlier that you've been getting some comments already on this environmental bill,
Yeah.
and you said you had some negative ones. What are people concerned about?
Yeah, so there's been a flurry, and usually if there's a lot of similar kinds of inputs, it's like folks who are talking to each other are part of an advocacy network, and so know that something is like timely. And usually then I'll hear for a longer period of time from people who are they see coverage in the paper, and so they reach out
Yeah.
individually. But there's an initial flurry around single-use plastic bans, restrictions. So just like Beverly went through the process of trying to cut back on plastic bags.
Yeah.
And that took a while to work with businesses in the city and residents and phase in and all that. And there was like a lot of good conversation. Enough communities have done that now, and the issues we have with plastics and just waste generation in general, single-use plastics in particular, have gotten more intense as well. And so it's been in the legislature before, and came back again this time, and was one of the most hotly contested talking points in the Senate. And I believe the provision that made it in the final debate would ban plastic bags and limit single-use food service, like knives and forks and cutlery and things, and packaging, and would put in a couple other provisions to encourage people to bring their own bags, use reusable materials, and with some exemptions for size of business. So small restaurants would not have to take on the new costs and new ways. But I think that's one that has been flagged as something that will probably be discussed again when it's on the House side.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that got kicked around.
Yeah.
It started out with, we can't use paper bags because all the trees are being destroyed. So we go to plastic. Now we can't use plastic
Yeah, now we
because
realize that is a problem too.
And I don't think too many people thought the whole thing through.
Well, sometimes we don't know in advance, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we make the best decision we can at a given time, and then learn more and make a new decision based on that.
Yeah.
So it feels like that's one of the things we're working through now.
So basically, this bill might help Beverly and Wenham, Beverly primarily, I guess, in terms of resilience at the coastline.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the ones that jumps out to me immediately, but there's a lot in here. So if there are improvements to to water access, or there's more funding available for moving to better recycling and composting and things like there's a whole host of things that
Yeah.
sort of fit under the environmental heading. Some of it's resilience, some of it's waste reduction, some of it's energy related, that we've tackled some of that separately. some of it's, yeah. So it's kind of across the board. So I think we'd benefit from some of the policy changes and some of the funding authorizations. In
Yeah,
there.
another one of those things that gets me scratching my head about is we have 2 different bins you put out for recycling.
Yeah.
One's got the plastic stuff in it, and the other's got the paper stuff. And then the truck pulls up and throws them all in the same pile.
Yes, we are a single stream recycling community now, and we'll
Yeah.
see. So the city is actually, Wenham just renegotiated their trash pickup. Beverly is reviewing proposals, bids right now, I believe, and we'll go to a new contract. The current contract's up at the end of June. So it's likely to change sort of what exactly is offered. But yeah, the last few years we've been a single stream community, so they still advise keeping things separate until they go out, because the longer paper is sitting with other stuff, like the more contaminated it gets. But yeah, it is sorted off-site, and that whole industry is changing rapidly.
Oh, yeah.
So I had a really interesting conversation with folks about the bottle bill and redemption, and sort of, you know, how do we get better at incentivizing recycling of different kinds, and particularly the like reuse side of the market.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot to tackle.
So we had a half hour of fun, believe it or not.
Yeah.
It's time again. And it sounds like you're having a hell of a lot of fun downtown
Yeah, it's been great.
getting into it.
Yeah.
So you're going to run again.
That is the plan. It's already an election year.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah. That's one of the things about the special elections. You know, soon to get elected, and you got to start running again.
It's true. Yeah. I haven't been through a full year in office yet, but have already decided it's worth continuing, and I would be honored to be able to continue another term.
So as the season draws on, we'll have to have more discussions, especially about how this big bill is going through, the budget bill.
Yeah.
And the state is making, at the legislative level, is trying their darndest to get the budget passed on time for a change.
Yes.
So that'll be an interesting challenge.
It will.
So come back again and tell me all about that, what's happening.
That'll be great.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching us this evening. And as you mentioned, as I mentioned in the emails, send me one if you've got a comment. My email address is in the credits. And if you've got a longer comment to make, there's room for you here at the table. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.